Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to Kevin tonight. Kevin's from the Seattle, Washington area. Many different hats: aerospace engineer background, Air Force veteran. Also, he's got a great YouTube channel, Remote Cabin Radio. We'll talk more about that later. But Kevin, how are you doing today, sir?
Oh my gosh, I'm doing awesome. It's an honor to be here on your show. My favorite show in the Sasquatch realm. It's great. Seattle is cloudy and beautiful as normal. Doing great.
Fantastic. You reached out to me, and you've got some really interesting things in your background that have to do with Bigfoot and also some military connections. Really wanting to jump right into that, and feel free to paint the picture of what you've experienced over the years. It sounds really fascinating.
Okay, just a little bit about my background. I was a C-130 Loadmaster. I did my SEER training out at Fairchild Air Force Base. Anyone that's been out to Spokane, it was the famous incident where that B-52 cartwheeled, unfortunately, into the tarmac out there during an air show. But it's got a rich history of Bigfoot sightings, Sasquatch, depending on who I don't want to offend. Yeah, when they're doing a SEER training, you'd hear crazy things out there in the mountains. And if anyone that's been through it knows that you don't want to do it in the winter, but you'll hear certain things out there at times of the year. That's not my two stories, but that was just the initial Bigfoot sounds when I knew something was up. I didn't quite know what it was, but it didn't sound natural. And as far as Air Force goes, I deployed as many times as I could overseas after September 11th. C-130 air and land operations. You would not believe you can see with actual night vision glasses. I'm not talking about the thermal spread spectrum kind. If you want to see Bigfoot or Sasquatch or anything weird out there, you need the real phosphor, the green or white phosphor NVGs. They're more expensive, but you pay for. So that's really as far as I think is relevant with the Air Force connection. After that, I did Boeing for 7 years as a weight and balance engineer that certified many of the flight test aircraft, the heavies. I want to be specific. Had nothing to do with the smaller airframes. I'm making that apparent for various reasons, what's going on in the news. But the new Air Force One airframes, my name might be on that airworthiness ticket, hypothetically. Let's see, 787, certified a few of the tankers. Okay, moving on from Boeing. Then I became a commercial diver, which is like a redneck astronaut. The closest thing you could do to becoming an astronaut is a commercial diver. And my gosh, the remoteness of some of those dams and the places as a commercial diver, which also leads into compressed air work, which is something else I do in tunnel boring diving operations, is where you're pressed down to, let's say, 3 to 4 bar, depending on the depth. There's an equalized pressure barrier that you back off the tunnel boring head, and it creates a little pocket, and you can work on the tunnel boring device. If you hear any cracks, remember this, if you hear any cracks like broken glass, jump back into that chamber because it's about to let go and you're going to be a pancake. But I did that. I'm still doing that off and on when I find choice assignments. And I'm also a certified diver medical technician, which is like a EMT, but for divers. And on the side, I'm working on a veterans project for mental health and awareness called Electric Sky Ranch over in the Chelan area, which ties into one of my Bigfoot stories, and remotecabinradio.com. So that's probably the cliff notes. I know I'm skipping a lot of stuff, but I don't want to bore anybody with it. Back to you, Jeremiah.
Absolutely incredible. I don't know if you listen to the Sean Ryan show ever.
Absolutely, yeah.
I love the Sean Ryan show just because I've never been a military guy, but I started listening to those and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is fascinating, this SEAL stuff. So I almost felt like I was slipping into that a little bit when I was listening to you talk. It's a fascinating world that I was not able to be a part of because of some medical things in my past. It's just hats off to you for all the different things you were able to be involved with and still are involved with being.
Yeah, sorry about that. I joined the Air Force. As for the military, my hat's off to those guys. Sometimes we didn't even have room service in our uniforms when we sent away to be pressed. I mean, there was like creases and stuff like that. And many times our hotels didn't have ketchup. It was horrific. Being deployed overseas was horrific, sir. So we're all part of Rome. We're all part of it. That's the way I look at it.
Absolutely.
So served or not, we're all sermon.
You had mentioned you went somewhere for training, and you said SER training. Is that correct?
SERE, survive, evade, resist, escape, SEER training. Like some people that deploy or like flyers will go through SEER training. SEALs, definitely. I was just a cargo cowboy, and I was never like a tactical operator, and I knew those guys, some quite well, but I didn't have what it took to be something like that. So I really have a love for aviation, but those guys are on a completely different level from me, sir.
Absolutely. It definitely paints the picture of your background. Kevin, let's jump right in. And
okay, so my first account actually takes place in the Lake Chelan area. I don't want to say exactly where, but let's just say I'm in high school. That's really what it was. I'm with a couple buddies of mine, and I had a 4Runner with super swampers. I don't know if your audience or you're familiar with super swampers, big knobby tires. So we used to like off-roading. Is so much fun. It was like a key component to my adolescence. And we were out there at night off-roading, maybe popping off a few rounds, shooting cans, drinking oat sodas or Diet Cokes, asterisk there. And again, I don't condone any sort of thing like that now or ever, but that's what we were doing. We had a couple sodas. And so we're off-roading around the mountains of Lake Chelan circa 1997. And we're coming around, these corners at night, and it's a real steep mountainous area. To one side, we have Lake Chelan. To the other side, it's basically a mountain, like heavily forested, lots of deer around, plenty of water. That's what some people say is squatchy, I guess. I didn't know it at the time. Didn't even know what that meant at all. And all of a sudden, we're racing around this corner, and there's something coming up the side of the mountain, like right in the center of the road. And it was down on all fours. It did not look like a cow. We're moving so fast, I had to drift around this thing. But as soon as the headlights hit it, it turned its head to the side. And what I did see, and everybody else in the vehicle, these are my best friends. I trust them. We didn't have too many diet sodas where we weren't coherent. This thing turned its head, and it just froze. It was cinnamon, and you could see muscles all over it. I thought it was a bull because your brain automatically wants to recognize a pattern. At least that's what they say. And this pattern that I recognized was like a bear or a bull, but it really made no sense. And we drifted around it. And we just continued on going, and everyone in the car was just so shocked that there was this massive, like, meaty creature in the center of the road. And as soon as we passed it, we wanted to keep our speed up, and we were having fun. The guys turned around, and it was already gone. It was already gone. There's no cattle ranch on a mountainous cliff anywhere near there, let alone, I don't know why a rancher would let his cow out at night like that, but it was just so shocking. I don't even know what it was. I wish I could say it was a Sasquatch. I wish I could say it was a bear or a cow. But that was like my first experience into this realm of something very strange that didn't make sense. And I put it in the back of my brain, and that was the first account that I can say there, Jeremiah.
Have you done any research to see if similar type creatures were seen in the same area over the years?
I have. Lake Chelan in the Wenatchee National Forest is full of Sasquatch sightings, especially Ellensburg. That's another place that's not too far away. And where I did my SEER training, Fairchild Air Force Base, they're all over Washington State. At the time, I had no idea. It's a hotbed for Sasquatch, apparently.
So were there reports then of even people seeing this around the base as well?
Oh, Fairchild Air Force Base in Spokane. I don't know, because when I was in SEER training, I just hear some things. I didn't do any research on that then. But after the fact, years later, yeah, there's Sasquatch reports, many Sasquatch reports in the Spokane area. Too many to list. I can't even think of one that stands out that's any different from all the rest. There's corroboration in a lot of the data. You can eliminate the edge cases and apply a coefficient of, let's say, craziness or people making it up. but there's so much there. There's a huge preponderance of evidence of Sasquatch in Spokane and Washington State. I firmly believe it.
Absolutely. Thinking back to, it sounds like you saw it for a very short time, but you said it was all on all fours. How high off the ground was I guess you would say maybe the top of the head of this creature?
It was at least 5 to 6 feet on all fours. And the thing about its head was there was no like muzzle. There's no, you'd expect a cow muzzle. And we kept looking to see this cow's muzzle. I know I did, because you'd expect to see a large snout or different coloration, because my family grew up with cows. We raised cows in Bothell, believe it or not, but there was no snout. There was just no snout at all. Its head was turned to the side, and I kept waiting to see this snout, but there was no snout when we drove past it. So and that's why I assumed that its head was all the way back around, but I think it was shielding its eyes.
That's very tricky. Were you able to see like a shape to the head at all, or any other details to it?
What I saw with the head, it was rounded, and there was no tail. There was no tail at all. It was like a cow with no tail and a rounded head. That's what I have written in my memory. And cinnamon brown. It was bizarre.
Could you see, this is tricky because it's all on all fours, but something people will say about Sasquatch when they're looking at it is that the shoulders were just massive. The width of the shoulders were massive. Could you see anything?
Yes.
Likewise to that.
Yeah, the shoulders were massive, because I thought it was a bull, because I saw rippling muscles on the shoulders. I didn't see the hooves or feet or anything like that. I was just moving too fast. And I think it's called the parallax of the light was above that, and the hood was above that. Like my visual horizon couldn't see below, let's say, the ankles, but it looked like it had massive shoulders. Massive shoulders, absolutely. It was not something that I wanted. I don't want to hit anything with my vehicle, but usually when, let's say you hit like a deer or something like that, you're not worried about your vehicle. But this looked like something that it would have done serious damage to the vehicle. It was like, do I hit the mountain or do I hit this thing type of deal?
Absolutely.
And I would have rather hit the mountain.
Yeah, I would probably be right there with you. Could you notice anything if, let's say, you have the back legs and the front legs, or the equivalents of, did you notice if they were the same sizes, or was one set maybe longer or shorter than the other set?
One thing that I was assuming that the back legs would be lower, but I thought that was because it was, just came off the mountain, but it was in the road by the time we got the headlights to it. So the hips were actually lower and the shoulders were higher. It didn't look like it was made for walking on all fours. It didn't look like it was parallel, like a cow. How a cow is, like its shoulders and its hips are like the same height approximately. Looked like it was like bent. I wish I had more data for you with it, but my mind wanted to build this pattern. It must be a cow. After examining it, I just don't think it was, because of these very things that you're asking me.
Yeah, the more details that are coming out in this, it does start painting a certain picture. You said there was cinnamon type colored hair. Were you able to see if it was long, the length of the hair or anything?
That's another thing. It did not look like cow hair at all. It was hair. It wasn't fur. Because cow hair, it's like curly and coarse and short. This was like long. It was long. It almost looked like it was conditioned or something like that. It was clearly cinnamon brown. It didn't look matted at all. A lot of times people say that and who's to say they're not, maybe they just got up from like a sleep, they didn't have their coffee or something like that. But this thing looked like it was healthy, and whatever it was looked healthy, and it had like hair, not, I'd say at least 6 inches long, all over it, down its arms, and it was the same color. It wasn't like a Hereford cow or a milk cow or anything like that.
Gotcha. And you said no ears, but also no horns either, sounds like.
No horns whatsoever. And the ears, I couldn't even see the ears, honestly.
And no tail.
No tail. That was another funny thing.
It definitely sounds like it was a thing where as you said, your mind was trying to build a pattern based on things that you knew. And the more we talk about it, it doesn't sound like it was probably a cow, but that's the closest thing your mind could use to fill in the blanks. And did you smell anything weird around that area when you were driving through?
Did. It smelled skunky in my Jeep because of my inhabitants and probably a stale oat soda served. I couldn't say, actually. I couldn't say. We were inside the Forerunner at the time.
Yeah, I got you. Okay, cool.
Just being kids.
I guess another question I could ask, no weird sounds, but if you're inside the Forerunner, you wouldn't be really hearing many sounds besides that.
The engine, I think we were playing 2 Live Crew or something to date the situation.
Nice.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes.
That is such a really interesting sighting. It makes you wonder. And at that point, you're just having fun, right? In 97.
Yeah,
and you're not going to get out and see if there's tracks, and you're just having a good time.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's a fun one. I'd never really heard one like that. I'd be curious if someone listening has experienced something like that on all fours in that same area. If they could reach out or put it in the comments, that would be amazing. You say you've also had something interesting happen at a range.
Yes, Fort Lewis. And again, I don't want to make light of anyone's Bigfoot situation before we go on. These 2 situations were more or less, they were funny and they were fun. But I've heard these eyewitness testimonies, especially on your show, Jeremiah, Bigfoot Society. Like, you guys, your guests have so much courage coming forward, and I know what they've had to deal with. A lot of people they reach out to for support, they're ridiculed. I hate that. I hate that that's happened to your guests in the past. But I trust you to share my story. But I've got no dog in the fight, and I'm not really worried about being ridiculed for this or other things. But you provide like a really good environment for people to share their stories. What you're doing is like a public service, and it's so important. Like, these stories that people share are traumatizing, and they're scary. Like, I just don't want to come across as I'm making light of anything, even though my stories were funny. You know?
Oh, absolutely. And I wouldn't say it's coming across as that, but I appreciate you calling that out. It is, once you start to experience stuff yourself, which I'm starting to realize that yes, it is very important that there is an outlet, whether it's Bigfoot Society or Sasquatch Odyssey or Sasquatch Chronicles. It's important that these things are in place so that people have someone to talk to, that they're not afraid of being laughed at or losing their jobs. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So this next story was on Fort Lewis. Anyone that's ever been to Fort Lewis or around Mount Rainier might know of these accounts. Fort Lewis backs up against, or the Fort Lewis Range backs up against the Mount Rainier National Forest, just to give some geographical context. So back in 2007, I was also in the Army. We were doing some training, and we were out there for a weekend. We met at Camp Murray, and I was part of the opposing forces group, and then there was a main group, and we were supposed to go out and find them. I was the Air Force guy, so I was the Air Force guy with a bunch of Army people. So, I, of course, thought I was like, oh, I'll show these Army guys how it's done. That's not how it went. And I'm like, oh, that's a really big gun you got there. They're like, sure, you can carry the big gun, Air Force guy. And I was like, oh, boy, neato. And so they gave me a 249, which is a SAW, a squad automatic weapon. And they proceeded to load me down with all the ammunition, 2 or 3 sacks of ammunition. So I'm not used to ruck marching coming from the Air Force world. Not that the Air Force people don't PT and march hard, but the vast majority of the Air Force, they don't necessarily train like that. So that was an eye-opener. So we're all loaded up with our Alice packs and our ACU, or I think our activity vest. I forget what it's called now. It's been so long ago. And I have, a SAW with a bunch of ammunition. And everybody else has these nice little light M4s, the M16. It's just it's cute. And so I'm by the near end of this ruck march, I'm at the very end of the line. I think I sent you a picture of that very weekend, loaded up. I was very proud. That was before I nearly had a heart attack keeping up with these soldiers. So we get out there to our first camping spot. And this is after an afternoon of chasing each other down and trying to surprise the main group. Because once we got to this sort of theater of operations, we broke off into opposing forces and the main contingents of the group. And it was an OCS group. And then it was a blast. It was just a great weekend. The opposing forces, we got in these at least one unmarked van. I was in the very back, and we're blasting Metallica and just like pumping up metal music. And we're just cruising
nice.
around the range looking for other soldiers to pop off with like blanks. And we're just like shooting blanks at doing like drive-bys. I don't think this is incriminating at all. Do I need to say allegedly? But that's just what the training was. And we did that all afternoon, like ambushing the other soldiers. And it was just a blast. And so, we have an afternoon of this, and then we meet back up with the main group, and we're more or less, I don't think we were digging foxholes. There were already some foxholes out there, and we, just set up a perimeter, a mock foreign territory type of deal. And so we're bedding down for the night, and then they pick, the first couple guards. I was one of them facing one direction. I wish I could say south, east, or west, but I don't remember. We were in the forest. Mount Rainier was in the background, and it was like really dense forest. And then there was another person keeping guard on the opposite side of our little base. Oh, and another thing about Fort Lewis, you really got to be careful where you're sleeping, because there's like these African ants that are all over the place. They will chew you up. It's an invasive non-native species. So just keep that in mind if you ever want to go like exploring on the range looking for things. Or Mount Rainier, I'm sure they've proliferated all over the place. So we're getting ready to bed down for the night. Right? We've established a perimeter. There's like little sleeping bags all over this little grove. The sun is going down, and then the instructors let us, the guards, and everybody else know, hey, we're going to be testing you guys throughout the night, and there's other instructors out there, so make sure you don't fall asleep. That's the enemy. Your lives could depend on this someday if you're deployed. I'm like all hot to trot, and I don't want to let down my team. I don't want to get them killed or myself. So I'm like super diligent, and I want to show these Army guys that are, what the Air Force has to offer. Integrity first, service for self, and excellence in all we do. That sort of deal. But still, these guys know what they're doing. And I'm slowly but surely, like the sun is going down, it's dark, and I'm not nodding off, but it's getting later and later. I'm tired. My other teammates still awake. I think one of the instructors at least is awake all night, but I'm basically the lone man facing one direction, protecting the other troops. As the evening wears on, it's pitch black now. All I see is just some trees and shrubs. I start hearing something. There's something in the distance sneaking up on us. And I, of course, have my saw all cocked with it's ready to go, with the belts ready. It's all clean. And cleaning those things is just a pain in the butt, too. It was another kind of hazing process they gave for me. But I'm ready to go. I know there's going to be an instructor sneaking up on us. That's just what I suspected. So I hear these like footsteps in the distance, and it's clearly footsteps. It's not like a deer like hopping around or like something on four legs. There's somebody taking a step, stop, or step. It's bipedal. It's objectively bipedal. The last story was maybe it was a cow, maybe it wasn't. This is footsteps, and it gets louder and louder, and I'm looking for where it should be, and I don't see anything, but there's lots of trees. So I'm like, oh, they're being sneaky. I think I know what's going on, these instructors. So it gets closer, and I'm not going to have any of this. I'm going to show them that I am on guard. I'm going to be like the top soldier. So I'm waiting till it gets really close. It's getting closer and closer. It's like an Alfred Hitchcock movie playing out in real time. And then it gets maybe, I'd say, 15 yards away. And I've been listening to this from like the distance must have, it sounds like 100 yards away. It gets real close. And I stand up and I shoot in this direction with the SAW 249 on full auto, just right at this direction. And everybody wakes up. And this thing, this shadow, whatever it was, runs along the periphery of our little camp, like just on the edge. It's running. It's like a shadow. You can see the branches moving. And it runs through these bushes right on the outside, and then through our camp after it gets outside of my visual range, and it runs through a few of the sleeping bags through the center of our camp. Everybody wakes up on that side too, and I'm the only one shooting, and they're like, stop shooting, what's going on? And then the instructors pop off a couple flares because they didn't know what this thing was, and so everybody is just really freaked out. And then a couple of the other students thought it must have been a bear. It must have been that. I'm like, you guys were sleeping. This was not a bear, let alone it was brushing like branches that were 8 feet, at least 8 feet up in the air, if not 6 to 8 feet up in the air, and it ran through our camp. It was bipedal, and the instructors didn't even know what it was. It was just the wildest thing. But it's like a scene of Apocalypse Now. Some of the other people started shooting too, flares going off. It was a wild situation. And that's basically the end of it. This thing took off running and it was gone. Whatever it was, we scared it, I think. Yeah.
Kevin, that must have been
basically
horrifying.
Yeah. It was like before I thought it was a human, and then like this giant shadow thing ran by us just inside part of the perimeter too, inside where my fellow soldiers were sleeping. And I have effectively a noise gun. I can't do any sort of real damage to the thing. Not that I'd want to. I really wouldn't. But yeah, it was just, I'm sure I scared it half to death. I was scared too. It was just a wild time, sir. Just a wild time.
Because you had blanks at that time, right?
Just blanks. We all had blanks.
Okay.
I don't think anyone had anything besides the flares that were shot up.
For some, can you, for some listeners, just explain the difference between having blanks versus normal ammunition?
Yeah, it's 5.56 223 rounds, and it's just a belt-fed round essentially, but there's no bullet. It's about a third the normal loudness of a regular round. And you can feel it in the recoil too. But it's complete, just all show, no go type of round. You never want to be in a situation where you actually need a gun and you have blanks. And we even had these little caps. They're like orange caps on the ends of our guns. I know I did on my saw. But yeah, it just makes a lot of noise. A lot of noise.
So
but, yeah.
It's running through your camp. It's just being lit up with sound. Nothing's hitting it, but it's like
not at all
crazy sounds all over the place. It's probably freaking out.
Yes, exactly. Because I started shooting first, and then a couple of the other cadets didn't want to be let out of the party either, so they wanted to show that they were doing a good job. And a lot of them started shooting. Then the instructor shot up their flares too. It was pretty hilarious after the fact, and then we all wrote it off as, oh, it must have been a black bear. And we're like, sure, it was a black bear. And there are black bear out there, but this wasn't no black bear. To be grammatically correct, ain't no black bear.
Running on 2 feet all the time.
Full time.
Did you notice you probably weren't in, I don't know, I'll just ask, were there tracks left when it ran through the camp, or were there things that were just mowed over when it ran through, things like that?
I actually didn't check for tracks. I probably should have. The instructors were pretty decisive after the fact. They were more or less like, what are you doing? There's no instructors out there. I was just telling you that to keep you on guard, part of your training. Like, stop firing, get back to bed now. That's what we did. It was a follow orders type of deal. Yes, sir. But I should have.
Did you guys have to do reports about what happened or anything like that?
I wouldn't have. Maybe the instructors did. But I think sightings of, if they wrote it off as a bear, are just so common. But again, I'm assuming. I really don't know. I was more or less trying, the majority of my time there was trying to stay hydrated and perform and not have a heart attack with these other guys. I was not prepared for that hike.
Absolutely.
At all.
After that event, was there any chatter between you or people that you were there with, other soldiers? What was that? Or I've heard something like that before, or anything like that?
Oh yeah. There was chatter. We were all talking about it. Like that wasn't a bear. What was that? That was exactly it. A lot of those guys were not local. No, it was a Washington Guard outfit, so they were local. We didn't really talk about Sasquatch or Bigfoot. We just agreed that it wasn't a bear. And again, this is just busy training. We didn't have a lot of time for that sort of stuff, and we went immediately to sleep. I think it was the next person on guard, and they really didn't want us like talking all night. Right. And then the next day we packed up and left, and we didn't see each other again until a couple weeks later, and then it's on to the next training event.
Wild story.
That was pretty much it.
Yeah,
it wasn't bad. It was terrifying for a second, and then it was just like it happened so fast. Yeah, those are like my two like little kind of funny stories.
Now, we had off air, we were chatting before the interview, and If I need to cut this out, I can. But you said you had interesting anecdote that you had heard that was from, or I'll let you fill in how you would like to fill it in.
Sure. So when I was in the Air Force, this is like many years before my time in the Army. I was, at a base called Pope Air Force Base in Fort Bragg, as a home of Special Forces. And somebody told me that they were on a team that hypothetically knocked off a couple Sasquatch in the Fort Lewis area. And, the home of the Special Forces, you can draw a line to what those different groups are. But they said they killed a couple of them in Fort Lewis. And I didn't think anything of it. Then years later, recently, in fact, I listened to the Sasquatch Chronicles, another great show. And there's an episode called Up the Hill. I recommend you listen to that, because in Up the Hill, the gentleman was also doing opposing force training. And he went to a portion of the base that encountered some Green Berets doing live fire, what appeared to be exercises, but it wasn't an exercise. They were doing some type of base cleansing or base cleaning. And then they killed a couple of them. This is corroboration. These things, they bleed, they breed, they go to the bathroom. They can be killed. You're probably going to have to use like a 50 caliber or get the right shot, but they can absolutely be killed. They're a living creature just like us. But yeah, that's some corroboration. I firmly believed that person at that time.
Wow, that is wild. Yeah. It sounds like there's some interesting things going around that Fort Lewis area, and in close proximity to Mount Rainier area. It's not a surprise really, but be interesting to hear if listeners have also heard things as well from that area. You kind of alluded to what you might think, but I'm going to just ask you straight out. What do you think when you think of a Bigfoot or Sasquatch? What do you think it is that we are dealing with?
So I've been looking into it, and I don't know if all your listeners have heard of Melba Ketchum or read the DNA study, but I highly encourage you to do that. It's free online. You can go to her website or you can Google it. It's a PDF. She put a lot of time and effort into it, and she was blackballed, lost a lot of her career. I'm just going to go a little bit into her background. Melba Ketchum is like a rock star of the DNA world. Her techniques and her lab has been used for federal cases, state cases, county cases to convict people of crimes, send people to death row or more or less. But her techniques are used to the legal standard. She's not a joke. She's not somebody that fakes things, because that'd be immoral, and these governments, or these local, state, or federal government wouldn't use her services. So that being said, she decided to take on the task of doing a DNA study. And this is, I think, from like 2012 or 2016. It's many years ago. But nobody would publish her work because they doubted her techniques or something like that, which is just ridiculous. So she had to buy her own magazine and publish it. And they nitpick, maybe a period isn't right or it's not quoted right, but the science is good. And again, I'm not a biologist or anything like that, but I know enough to know that 2 + 2 = 4, and her techniques are good enough for a legal standard. It's easily good enough for this. And from what I can tell, she went above her normal standard to convict someone and sentence them to death. She went many times above that sort of level of scrutiny. And so the DNA study more or less says that 15,000 years old, let's just say they were created 15,000 years ago. And our mitochondrial DNA, the female DNA, is completely human. The nuclear DNA is 4% unknown. So it's human. It's a composite of human and 4% unknown DNA. People may say that's clearly we bred with the gorilla 15,000 years ago, and that's how we got Sasquatch. Or maybe it's just inconclusive. No, this is a hard fact. This is a hard data point where there is no conjecture. There is no speculation. We now know what these things are. These things are a hybrid human. We don't need to speculate anymore. We don't need to waste our time. We have a new data point to build from. At least with Bigfoot or Sasquatch. It doesn't mean that there's not other things out there, which there definitely are. If we start trusting the Native Americans for a change instead of ridiculing them or thinking that they're crazy. If the salmon is real, if the bear is real, the mountain lion, the Bigfoot, the eagle is real, what else is real? I worry about the skinwalker, the wendigo, the dogman, all these other things. If one thing's real, there's probably some truth to these other things too. And I think it's high time we start trusting the witness for a change. Anyways, what I think Bigfoot is, I think it's exactly that. I think there's a DNA study and a preponderance of evidence that leads us to believe these things are definitely real. I've seen something. I don't know what it is. I've seen something and I trust the DNA studies. Once we know that there's a Sasquatch around, what is it? 15,000 years ago, how could that possibly be? Evolution doesn't work that fast. It can't. Evolution's real. I trust that there's evolution. I'm not saying that evolution explains everything. It does not explain these things. So what fits the data? We have all the data. What picture does it paint for us? What I think it does is that these things were created. How would we create something? We would genetically engineer it. We can. It's called CRISPR. It requires an advanced civilization. So 15,000 years ago, there was an advanced civilization that genetically engineered these things from our DNA. I don't think that there's anything else that fits the data. If there is, I'm open to it. I am. But it ain't no Gigantopithecus. Genetic material isn't even compatible mating naturally with a gorilla or a chimpanzee or something like that. But another thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about, when you're thinking about Sasquatch, the difference between us and chimpanzees is what, Jeremiah? It's 2%. Haven't you heard that? It's 2% different.
I have heard that. It's a very low number. It's really interesting how, especially over the last few years, it seems that the subject has just gotten. I feel it's gotten bigger, and that might be due to shows that got popular back in the day, like Finding Bigfoot for 10 years and all that good stuff. But I just feel like it is getting bigger, and there's some good people out there doing some good research, and some that aren't even talking about it, and they're not even. You've got the Olympic Project, you've got NAWAC, you've got the war guys who are also down in Southeast Oklahoma. Then you've got guys that they don't want to talk about what they're doing in the public. And I barely hear stuff about them. And I just think one of these days are going to get some solid evidence. Do you think it's going to take a type specimen to finally prove to the world that what we've got here is real, or do you think it could just be a DNA study that is enough?
They've got tons of specimens. It ain't gonna make it. It's not gonna make a bit of difference. Like if you can, you have these people that think they're the great American hunter and they're gonna go out into the woods and not only kill one but bring it back and then get it on the news. This is the same thing I've told a few people. Good luck. Good luck surviving the Sasquatch, because they're just like us. They're not gonna let their buddy that falls into the chimpanzee pit at the zoo carve up one of their friends and then take it outside of the zoo to their tribe. It's not going to happen. But if they do get lucky, and let's just say they surprise a Bigfoot, nothing's perfect. These things aren't perfect. And you do kill it in a defensive way. You get a cantankerous Bigfoot that's trying to kill you and your family. You kill one of them. And do you think the government is going to let you put it on the news? You might get a local news story. You might. And then it'll just go completely black. There is no way that the U.S. government, if they don't want something out there, they're going to let something as monumentous as this, a parallel apex species occupying this planet. Because there's not enough people that care about this. They're just too, wrapped up in their own lives. People are busy. Times are tough. You've got American Idol and whatever Days of Our Lives on TV. You're just not going to. The vast majority of the voting electorate are not going to pay attention to this. And a body ain't going to make a bit of difference. A picture ain't going to make a difference. Nothing. It's just going to take enough people waking up. But I highly discourage anyone from going out there and trying to kill one of these things. It would be superfluous. It would be wasteful, and they would probably die by the Bigfoot or the government. It just ain't gonna happen.
I agree 100%. And man,
plus it's immoral.
I can't get into
it's immoral.
There's I'm having an internal monologue. I'm not gonna get into a few things on air, but I will. So
please.
But I will say this. I agree with you that if people, you guys, you got to be careful because they're never alone. And if you are lucky enough to take one down, you will not, I don't think you'll survive. That's really what it comes down to.
Absolutely
you will not. So just be careful. And
don't do it.
Yeah.
It's immoral. And then people that want to find these things, it's look, they're territorial. We've already encroached on their habitat enough. If it's one thing if you don't know the signs, but if you're seeing these tree structures, especially upside down trees, or you're hearing wood knocks where they're like counting you in your group, you know you're close to them. Like putting trail cameras up all over the place, you're not going to find them. They can see infrared. You might see NVGs, but like intent matters. These things are enough, or they can read your mind, whatever. They know your intent. And if you're open carrying a rifle into their quote unquote living, they're not going to want to meet you. They're just not. They'll pick who they want to meet, and they probably already have with some of this mind speak. I recommend reading that book, by the way. There's one book by Chris. It's called Mind Speak. It's pretty good. There's like this person called No Bite and Netanya. Man, I'd love to. That's a different segment that I'd like to ask you about. But just don't go into their home with a bunch of movie cameras and expect any results. Certainly don't go into their bedroom, quote unquote, their bedroom, like the forest, and take shots at them. You're just not, you're endangering yourself and whatever you bring along with you that have no idea, that think it's a game. It's not a game. These things are, it's like fighting Superman without kryptonite, with a pop gun. That's legitimately what you're doing.
Absolutely.
So just, be real careful. People don't take this stuff seriously because shows like Finding Bigfoot or whatever, I get it's done a certain way back then, but there's been a paradigm shift. No longer do you have to have this discerning, skeptical person in the group that's I can't prove it. I'm the scientific person. No, the scientific people are the ones conducting this research. The real scientific people are letting the data build the picture, not like someone's own conditioned paradigm try and fit the data like into this picture of reality that they have. It's the Buddhists call it beginner's mind. Let the data build the picture, and a real scientist will tell you that the data speaks for itself. It's obvious. It's obvious, sir.
Kevin, have you been doing any research yourself, like going into areas and trying to establish contact or look for anything, or?
I might have. I might have there, Jeremiah.
Yeah,
I might. Maybe we can talk about that sort of stuff later. Maybe I've incorporated certain things.
Like to be continued. I understand. That's cool.
Yeah. When you have a small plane in certain areas you can scope out, there's certain things.
That's quite the tool to have if you have access to a small plane and you can fly that small plane. That's pretty cool. I would love to talk for a few minutes about what you're doing with remote cabin radio.
Oh, yes. Okay. Remote cabin radio is just a pet project. Like I think all channels like yours are just so inspiring. And I've always had a love for the mysterious and unknown and Cold War. Eventually, I'll start a podcast too. I'm not just going to focus on Sasquatch. I just don't have a skill set for it, and I don't have the connections. But I'm really interested in Cold War. So many technologies and nifty things have come out of the Cold War, and it deals with even aliens, the Cuban Missile Crisis, just our history. It's basically about U.S. history and mysteries. That's what remote cabin radio is. And I'm right now, the only thing that's on the channel are just primary source narrations. What I'm doing with a company called 11 Labs out of New York, it's a voice cloning program. Eventually, I'll clone my own voice. I just haven't gotten around to it, but I'm using voices that are already cloned. It's not a synthetic speech program. That sounds a little bit better than Stephen Hawking. It's nothing like that. So I'll take primary documents and I'll plug them into 11 Labs, and then I'll have it on my channel, and that's the primary source narration component. The podcast will go along with it, but anyone that listens to the podcast can take the other episodes of the narrations and listen to those, so they're knowledgeable about the episodes on the podcast. It's just supporting documents. So it's making a lot of these stories like or the Melba Ketchum DNA study, or some of these primary documents that are super important, accessible for people, and then they can listen to that and then listen to the podcast, or vice versa, or nothing. I've got 3 subscribers, and one of them's a cat, and it is what it is, but it's boring. but it's boring for a reason because it's foundational. I'm trying to be vertically integrated. But the podcast will be along sooner or later. Either way, like I love listening to your channel. You're what inspires me, Jeremiah. Like I love Bigfoot Society.
I appreciate that. And I recommend people definitely check out Remote Cabin Radio. There's a lot of really cool videos on there already, Bigfoot, non-Bigfoot stuff. So it's definitely worth checking out, subscribing, all that good stuff. But any final thoughts about Bigfoot as we start to wind down our conversation, Kevin?
Yes. Are you kidding me, Jeremiah? I could talk your ear off. So, all right. So I'm going to ask your audience and you this. So we know what Bigfoot is now. So let's just say some of your audience members have contact with Sasquatch. There's reports of this, and I'm pretty sure at least one of your audience has mind speak with these things. Yes, I said mind speak, and yes, I believe it. I've never experienced it, but I believe it. If we could talk to a clan of Sasquatch or a Sasquatch, what would you ask them? I know what I would ask them. Do you want to know what I would ask them, Jeremiah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay. This would be one of my questions. What do you know about your own creator? That would be one question. What do you know about our creator? Can you tell us anything about ancient Egypt or ancient Mesopotamia or any other ancient civilization? Did we ever live together in peace? Do you think we will ever live in peace together again? What advice do you have for our species? Can you tell us about mind speak? And tell everyone I said hi. That's it.
I'd love to know that as well. And I'd probably like to know more about the whole infrasound thing too, how that works.
Oh,
That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, let's add it to the list. And one last thing. I think, call me crazy, but I think we might need them someday, and they might need us. So be real careful how you treat them and treat each other and treat the environment. It's really important. We can't change the fact that there's aliens and Sasquatch. Don't be afraid of it. They've been here for a long time. They're not as old as us. They're ancient, but they're not primal. But be good to each other. Don't treat this life that's all you got, and treat this environment like it's all you got. There's a lot of creatures counting on us to take care of this environment, better or worse. Be good to each other in the environment. That's it, Jeremiah.
Fascinating. Kevin, thank you so much for coming on and chatting. You had some great encounter stories and also a really interesting chat about some DNA stuff I didn't really know a lot about. And I appreciate you sharing that. You guys, make sure you go over to Kevin's channel, Remote Cabin Radio, to find out more about the stuff that we were talking about. I believe there's some DNA study things over there and some other Bigfoot related things that you'll probably like as well. Can people reach out to you, or are you in the shadows for now?
Oh, yeah, I wish I was that mysterious. Yeah, they can. RemoteCabinRadio.com has contact information on it. Email address is there. Or you know what? You can send me a letter. I like getting letters. I paid for that P.O. box, and we should use it. So feel free to send me letters about anything or an email,
Perfect.
Whatever you want.
So contact info is on the website there. I'll have that linked in the show notes if you need to reach out to Kevin directly about what he was talking about. But thank you so much for coming on tonight, Kevin.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Another special thank you to Kevin from Remote Cabin Radio. You can go to remotecabinradio.com to get all the info and all the links. Heads up about the episode you just heard. The goal with Bigfoot Society is to have it continue to keep going for a good long time. That being said, certain platforms are starting to have algorithms that kick in for certain subjects. The interview that was just played did have a significant part cut out of it due to, let's just say, things that are related to items that the Smithsonian used to try to gather, and then kind of go from there and put in all sorts of other stuff that would trigger algorithms. It's a fascinating chat, but if I put it on YouTube and other platforms, there's a high likelihood that it could really mess up a lot of things. That being said, I just want to point out again, there is a raw audio part of this recording that is available over on patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. Right now, it's the one platform I can put it on that I'm established, that I don't have to worry about stuff going sideways. So check that out if you are interested in hearing a bit more from Kevin. That does get very interesting and add to the conversation. And as always, thank you all for listening, and I'll see you next time. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's the list. All right, I'm going to use this space this week to announce that I'll be at the Sasquatch Summerfest in Oak Ridge, Oregon as an attender. I won't be presenting or anything, but I'll be hanging out trying to interview people that have had Bigfoot encounters. If you're from the Oak Ridge, Oregon area or surrounding and you've had a Bigfoot experience, please contact me directly, bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Also, Priscilla was nice enough that if you get your tickets through SasquatchSummerfest.com and use code Bigfoot Society, you can get 50% off the cost of your tickets, which is a big amount. So code Bigfoot Society to get 50% off your tickets, SasquatchSummerfest.com, and helps out the podcast as well. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.
Her and I can get on here and we can tell our stories. Maybe there's somebody else out there listening that's too afraid to tell their story. Maybe this will give them the courage to come out and not feel so bad about it. Who cares what anybody thinks? I know what I saw. I know what's out there. That's all I care about.
Please let people know. Please let them know. If you ever see one of these things, you need to tell. Because if you don't, then shame on you. You know? Shame on you.